There are mainly three types of Atmos mixes for music, each with their own issues and challenges, each providing different results, one being the most preferable one, and I'll share why later in the video. Greetings! I'm Pat from the Living Room Studios, and today we'll look into three different types of Atmos mixes, both from the perspective of the musician, producer that wants to work with an Atmos mixer, but also from the Atmos mixer's perspective, my perspective, and what I would like to be sent by clients. First, let's look at the easiest, but also the culprit and the reason for many mixes sounding really bad and giving Atmos as a format a bad name, and that is upmixing from a stereo mastered track. Not recommended, and depending on how you approach it, for example, throw the stereo track in an upmixer plugin and call it a day, it will get rejected by Apple. They even spell that explicitly in the immersive audio delivery specs. Now, so not to get misunderstood here, this does not mean that upmixers are not allowed. You totally can use an upmixer plugin creatively. For example, I use Penti all the time to nicely spread provided stereo reverb stems in the 3D space. Anyways, what should you do if you only have the stereo master? Use demixing algos to extract stems, as many as you can, and then mix these to Atmos. And this can be as involved as you want it to be. For example, when we get sent demixed stems that we don't think are the best to provide the best result, we demix our own, suiting out several algos for the initial extraction, but also diving deep and performing quite a bit of manual residual audio cleanup afterwards. But no matter what, this is not the best way and should only be used when absolutely nothing but the stereo mastered track is available. It might be the case for older work, for example from both major and indie labels, that the only thing available is a CD rip in 16-bit 44 kHz. You gotta work with what you have. If I may here, these types of mixes, which unfortunately still exist on services that stream Atmos like Apple Music and Amazon and Tidal and others, since they passed through less strict quality controls in the olden days of Atmos, where quantity rather than quality was the primary driving factor, are the main reason some artists, producers, and labels got on the wrong foot with the platform. And who can blame them? These mixes don't sound very good, and at no fault of the engineers that had literally nothing to work with. To be fair though, a lot of artists and labels, both indie and major, are removing some of those early convenience mixes and replacing them slowly but surely with real Atmos mixes. Having said all that, Apple just added to their guidelines that stem splitting is not allowed either, and songs submitted that have used demixing will get rejected. It is wild out there, man. It is wild. So moving on. Another type of Atmos mix is from pre-mixed stems. This is perhaps the one used more often. It yields great quality Atmos mixes, but you really need a sufficient amount of stems to work with. I would say 10-15 minimum. Drums, kick, snare, percussion, bass, synth bass, 808s, keys, brass, strings, BGVs, lead vocals, as well as all the effects separately on separate stems. At a minimum. Yes, it is genre and song specific, of course, but a great Atmos mix from stems would be from around 20 to 40 stems. For example, let's use keys. You can have a keys stem that includes all of them, or much better, have one stem for the synths, one for the organs, one for the pianos, one for the Rhodes, etc. You catch my point, right? So remember, these need to be pre-mixed, so when they get added all together, they sound like the original mix. And then part of the Atmos magic is that the Atmos mixer would need to match the mastered reference. There are plenty of videos on the tube if you need some help exporting stems from your DAW, but it should be pretty straightforward. Though Logic is a bit weird with exporting mono audio files, but that's a whole other story. So the third type, and yes, the one that sounds absolutely the best, in my honest opinion, is the Atmos mix from the pre-mixed multitrack. This is the best possible way since you have the flexibility to create a very dynamic and creative Atmos mix. The more tracks, the better. Remember, in a stereo mix, you're trying to squeeze all these things onto two containers, two speakers. In Atmos, you have at a minimum 7.1.2 and all the 3D space in between. At the studio here, we use a 9.1.4 setup. A very important point here again is that the tracks need to be pre-mixed, meaning all processing, editing, EQ, compression, distortion, etc., all the volume, the automation, and in certain cases the effects need to be baked in the audio file. Again, effects can be provided as separate tracks, stems, for example, the vocal delays. So when all tracks play together without active plugins, outboard, automation, and with volume at unity, they sound like the finished mix. Mono sources can and should stay mono. A better chance for a more dynamic and exciting Atmos mix if all two-bus processing has been disabled when printing out the stems. And a special note about lead vocals. It is perfectly fine to have all vocal effects baked in, but it is preferable to have a dry vocal and the vocal effects stem separately. Well, what about panning, you ask? Well, the artist and the producer can indicate desired panning in the notes, but of course you have to give the mixer the leeway to place everything the way they see fit for the 3D Atmos experience they are trying to create for you. The Atmos mixer will also have to get as close to the stereo mastered version as possible, and that's where Atmos mastering can be helpful, though it can be done during the Atmos mixing process. But these days, more and more artists are getting great results by mixing for Atmos first and getting the stereo master delivered from the Atmos mix, then mastering it in the traditional stereo sense, which is our process of choice for new Atmos releases here at the Living Room Studios, and what we suggest to artists releasing new materials. Catalog, meaning pre-released records, is a whole other process, of course. One last thing that needs to be noted here. If this is an Atmos mix for catalog, do not send the multitrack of unedited raw tracks, unless, of course, what you want is a different mix along with the Atmos mix. Which, in this case, bring it on, baby, bring it on. Immersive audio for me is the way forward, and Atmos is the major vehicle right now. But you have to be brave, my friends. I talk about this a bit more here.